I'm Tony.
I still remember that fateful family dinner like it was yesterday. The room was filled with the warm aroma of roast and pine, and the good china glistened under the soft light. There were 22 of us gathered around the table, celebrating my mother, Helen's, retirement from her long-standing job as a high-school literature teacher, and my sister, Ava's, new partnership at a prestigious medical research firm. I took a deep breath and stood up. With a voice that wavered only slightly, I said the two words I'd waited 6 long years to say. I'm pregnant. The room fell into an icy silence. Forks stopped mid-air, and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed to grow louder. My mother, Helen, put down her fork and picked up her wine glass. With a cold look in her eyes, she said, "Well, let's hope this one is smarter than you." My sister, Ava, sitting to Helen's left, covered her mouth with a napkin, but not quickly enough to hide her sneer. "At least now she won't be the only disappointment in the family," she murmured to Helen. My father, George, who worked as a financial advisor and was usually quiet, just glanced at his watch and said, "Can we eat now?" I looked across the table at my husband, Jake. He was a carpenter, and his hands were folded on the placemat, steady as the tables he built. He gave me a single, reassuring nod. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the letter I'd been carrying for weeks, and unfolded it. The room watched as I began to read. "Dear Tony, I'm writing this letter at your request so that you may share it with your family. Your current pregnancy is healthy, viable, and progressing normally at 26 weeks. Your daughter is developing on schedule, and all indicators are strong." As I continued, the room was completely still. "Over the past 6 years, you have experienced 5 pregnancy losses. After extensive testing, we identified the cause. You carry a balanced reciprocal translocation involving chromosomes 7 and 11. This is a structural chromosomal rearrangement that does not affect your own health, but creates a high probability of genetically unbalanced embryos during reproduction. This is not a lifestyle factor. It is not caused by stress, diet, timing, or personal failure. It is a documented, identifiable medical condition that has been present in your DNA since birth." By the time I reached the 3rd paragraph, my mother's face had changed. This type of translocation is inherited, passed from parent to child. Given your family history, including documented pregnancy losses in the previous generation, the clinical evidence strongly indicates you inherited this condition from your mother. My mother's hands started to tremble on the tablecloth. Her eyes welled up with tears, not the controlled ones she usually showed, but the kind that come from deep within. Ava sat there, pale and silent, realizing for the first time that she might have been wrong all these years. George stared at his plate, his jaw tight. I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket. I looked at my mother and said, "She doesn't have to be smart. She doesn't have to be the best. She just has to be loved." Then, Jake walked over to me, pulled out my chair, and we left the house in silence. Let me take you back to how it all began. I work in healthcare data analysis at a large city hospital. I sit in a small, windowless office on the 5th floor, poring over numbers to find patterns in patient readmissions, billing issues, and infection clusters. It's a job that requires patience and a sharp eye, skills that I've developed over the years. I met Jake at a local woodworking fair. He was showing off his custom-made cabinets, and I was there to buy a small bookshelf for my apartment. We hit it off immediately. He was kind, patient, and listened to me like no one else ever had. We got married and bought a cozy little house near the park. For the first few years, life was simple and happy. But then we decided to start a family. That's when our troubles began. The first year was filled with over-the-counter pregnancy tests and careful calendar tracking. The second year brought referrals to specialists, and the third year, the first needles and invasive procedures. I lost my first pregnancy at 9 weeks. I was at work, and I felt it happen right in my office chair. I drove myself to the emergency room, not wanting to burden anyone. I was the kind of person who always tried to handle things on my own. The second loss came at 11 weeks, and the third at 7 weeks. Each time, the doctors used the same phrase: unexplained recurrent loss. I never told my family about these losses. I knew what they'd say. Helen would find a way to blame my diet or my job. Ava, who had a brilliant career in medicine, would use that condescending tone and say it was just unfortunate and that I should give him more time. George would just nod and go back to his newspaper. So I carried the pain alone. I sat through countless appointments, endured painful injections, and had early, morning blood draws that left bruises on my arms. I hid these marks under long sleeves at family dinners, swallowing my grief like it was water. When I was 10 years old, I found a small, cedar box on the top shelf of the hallway closet. I was looking for some art supplies for a school project. The box had a warm, dry, and slightly sweet smell. I was about to open it when my mother appeared out of nowhere. She snatched the box from me and said in a low, firm voice, "Don't ever touch that." I asked Ava about it once, but she just shrugged and said it was Mom's old stuff. Don't be nosy. The treatments were expensive. The first year, we spent $15,000 out of pocket, and the second year it was $23,000. Insurance covered only a small part of the diagnostic blood work. I kept a detailed spreadsheet, tracking every procedure, cost, and outcome. Most of the outcomes were negative, but I never gave up. After my fifth loss, I was sitting in the clinic lobby, filling out the same forms for the fifth time, when my mother called. "Ava's being honored at a medical conference next week. Make sure you're there and dress appropriately." I just stared at the wall, thinking about how she was more concerned about my dress code than my repeated miscarriages. That was the day I decided to take matters into my own hands. My regular OB referred me to Dr. Maya Reed, a specialist in recurrent pregnancy loss. At our first appointment, Dr. Reed looked at my chart and said something that no one in my family ever had. "This might not be your fault." She ordered a full genetic workup. I started reading medical journals, looking for answers like I did with the hospital data. I built my own spreadsheet, cross-referencing case studies with my own loss pattern. I told Ava about the genetic workup over the phone. She scoffed and said, "Tony, stop playing doctor. You're overthinking this. Sometimes these things just happen." But I didn't let her words stop me. My mother also didn't support my decision. She called and said, "You need to stop this. It's embarrassing. Some women just aren't meant for it." I held back my anger and said, "I'll think about it, Mom." A few weeks later, Dr. Reed called me into her office. She showed me the chromosome diagram on her screen. "You carry a balanced reciprocal translocation, chromosomes 7 and 11, she said. She explained that this was the reason for my recurrent losses. There was a path forward, though, pre-implantation genetic testing, PGT, during in vitro fertilization, IVF. I also learned that this translocation was usually inherited from a parent. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, trying to imagine asking my mother to get tested. I knew she'd deny it and get defensive. Then my mother was downsizing. She asked Ava and me to help sort through the upstairs rooms. Ava was on a business trip, so it was just me and my mother. As I was moving some old boxes, I noticed that the hallway closet was open and the cedar box was right there on the top shelf, just as I'd seen it 20 years ago. My mother was in the kitchen, and I could hear the water running. I stood there, smelling the cedar, and I felt like a 10-year-old again. This time, I opened the box. Inside, there was a small, knitted baby hat, a hospital bracelet, and a footprint card with the name, Ethan, written on it. I had a brother I'd never known about. I called my Aunt Rose the next day. She was Helen's younger sister, a kind and gentle soul who always listened. When I asked about Ethan, she sighed deeply. "Ethan was your brother. He was stillborn. Your mother never got over it. And there were other losses before him. She never talked about them." I realized then that my mother had been carrying her own pain for so long. She had passed down the genetic condition that caused my losses, but she had never shared her story. We started the IVF and PGT process. It was a long and difficult journey, but we finally had some hope. Of the 9 embryos that developed, 3 came back normal. The first transfer failed, but the second one took. 2 weeks later, a blood test confirmed a viable pregnancy. Jake and I were overjoyed. We went for the first ultrasound at 7 weeks, and seeing that tiny heartbeat on the screen was a moment I'll never forget. As the pregnancy progressed, I kept it a secret from my family. I didn't want to face their skepticism or criticism. But then, Ava called me one night. Her voice was shaky, and she said she and her husband were having problems. She asked me not to tell her mother. It was a strange moment. Here was the sister who had always looked down on me, now coming to me for support. I felt sorry for her. I realized that we were both struggling in our own ways. 3 weeks later, at that fateful dinner, I decided it was time to speak up. I wanted to break the cycle of silence and shame in my family. And so I stood up and shared the truth. After we left the dinner that night, 3 weeks passed. Aunt Rose left me a voicemail saying I was right to speak up. A cousin I hardly knew sent me a text saying I was brave. Ava texted me after 23 days, asking if we could talk. I told her I'd talk when she was ready to be honest. My mother sent me a handwritten letter. Most of it was about her pain and how she'd been afraid I'd end up like her. She didn't apologize, but she did say she wanted to meet her granddaughter. I thought about it for a week and wrote back, saying she could be in my daughter's life, but only if she told the whole truth, including about Ethan. 11 days later, I got a short message. His name was Ethan James. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. My daughter was born on a sunny morning in September. Dr. Reed delivered her, and Jake cut the cord. When they placed her on my chest, she opened her eyes and looked at me with a curious gaze. I held her and thought about all the pain and the journey that had led to this moment. I kept the cedar box in my daughter's room, not hidden, but in the light. I spent so many years trying to prove myself to my family, but in the end, I realized that the most important thing was to love my daughter unconditionally. And I hope that by sharing my story, others who have been judged by their families will know that they are not alone and that the truth will always set you free.